So Roosevelt ordered the Secretary of the Navy to bring Sims home from China Station, and he said, give him entire charge of target practice for 18 months. Do exactly as he says. If he does not accomplish anything in that time, cut off his head and try someone else. Sims returned to a new set of orders. He was going to be the U.S. Navy's inspector of target practice. He held the job for 6.5 years. He was given a small staff, 2 young officers who had just made lieutenant themselves. 3 lieutenants changed the world. No problem, right? So Sims circulated his reports. Next slide. But he didn't make continuous aim fire mandatory. He just circulated them to every ship in the fleet. He made gunnery practice mandatory and set out the requirements for how much a ship had to practice. And he instituted a competition every year. Every year, every ship in the Navy would fire in the same exercise, the same parameters. And the winning ship would be announced to the United States, not just the Navy, the whole country. You didn't have to use his method. You could do whatever you wanted. But when you were done, when you had won, you had to write a report. And your report had to tell everybody how you did it. And so the gunnery officers on the battleships would pour over these reports year after year after year. They'd develop their own TTPs. They'd refine the ones that were in the reports. They'd write articles for the U.S. Naval Institute's proceedings that everybody would read. Everybody wanted to win. The winning ship got to fly a pennant on their yardarm that no other ship got to wear. That pennant had a large E on it. Guys, this is the birth of the Battle E. So, after 6.5 years, they conducted an exercise. A ship was given the opportunity to fire on the same target that Roosevelt's test had been done on. They had a minute instead of 25. And they hit the target over 20 times. They had a bullseye on the target. It was 50 inches square. Half of the rounds went through the bullseye. They had revolutionized gunnery. The United States Navy became the best Navy in the world almost overnight. The Royal Navy realized that they had a problem. And this guy, Percy Scott, that they had sent out to China Station because no one wanted to listen to him anymore, he was right all along. But they hadn't spent the time to develop the TTPs, and so they stole the American TTPs and started doing it themselves. Next slide. Here's an invitation for Lieutenant Commander Sims. He made Lieutenant Commander about 2 years into his tour as the Inspector of Gunnery. So for Lieutenant Commander Sims and his 2 assistants, Lieutenants McLean and Powers Symington, to come to a silent dinner at the USS Missouri. A silent dinner was kind of like a wardroom dining in, but with Vegas rules. What happens at the silent dinner stays at the silent dinner. And so it's the gun doctor, Lieutenant Commander Sims, and Ping and Pong, his 2 assistants. His 2 assistants that would go on to become admirals themselves one day. Next slide. So, the Bureau of Ordnance's chief himself admitted, the renaissance in gunnery, which came about chiefly through the instrumentality of Commander Sims, has led to great improvements in ordnance. Kind of an understatement, but even the Bureau admitted that he was right, and they changed the entirety of naval warfare. Okay, so 3 lieutenants changed the world, no problem, right? But the story doesn't end here. Next slide. William Sims went on, as we saw in the first picture, to be a vice admiral. And when the World War I broke out, he was sent to England, and he took command of all U.S. naval forces in England. Now, he arrived in England at about the time that the wolf packs were decimating the supply lines in the Battle of the Atlantic. England was on the verge of starvation. The British Islands could get no supplies. The Royal Navy had taken their fleet and they had massed all their battleships together and they were ready to fight the German high seas fleet. But they couldn't figure out how to stop these U-boats. And Sims arrives and he turns to a group of lieutenants, a group of junior officers, junior leaders. He says, what do you guys think? Now these lieutenants were all the commanding officers of a new kind of ship. It was called a destroyer. And they said, sir, we've been pitching an idea for about 2 years around here that if you send us out to convoy the supply ships across the Atlantic, and you let us work swarm against the wolf packs, we can beat them. But the admirals won't listen to us. They say we don't know anything about naval tactics. They say we don't know what we're talking about. So Sims turned to the British Admiralty and he said, tell you what, I'm going to bring a bunch of destroyers over from the United States. We're going to add about half of the force for this convoy. Why don't you let us give it a try? And almost overnight, the wolf packs started to lose their effectiveness. The convoys started, the supplies got through. American troops showed up in Europe. World War I was won. Was it won because William Sims listened to a group of lieutenants? No, not necessarily, but it definitely contributed. An innovative idea from a group of junior leaders made an important strategic world impact. Next slide. So the Milwaukee Journal wrote much later after Sims' death, that he continued to be a thorn in the fat flesh of the naval hierarchy during his entire career. When he came back from World War I, as a side note, he took over the Naval War College. He started wargaming. They developed this thing called War Plan Orange. And in War Plan Orange, a plan to defeat a power in the Pacific, the war games developed this idea that we needed to start building a new kind of ship. It was called an aircraft carrier. Same guy. Continuous aim fire, convoys, aircraft carriers. Next slide. All right, so here we are towards the end of my presentation. Lessons observed. What can we take away from this little bit of history, this story that I told today? The first thing is, to be an innovator, you need to know where your expertise lies. Okay? Sims had studied battleships. He had studied gunnery. He had expertise there, but he also knew what he didn't know. He knew that he had to ask questions. He knew that he didn't know everything, and so he continued to study. You know, during those 2 years that he was writing those reports, he was constantly making them better. He was talking to his wardroom mates. He was talking to the gunner's mates. He was figuring out answers to questions that kept lingering in the development of the TTP. So you have to know where your expertise lies, but you also have to work hard. You have to study. You have to research. You have to do the hard work. Now, you also need to find a way to talk about your idea. And there's a couple different ways. The first way, like Sims did, is we have to work inside the system. So what are the things open to us? Well, we've got NWDC in concept development. We heard about ONR and the resources we have there. Okay, we've got our chains of command. You can put in an ATOPS change if you're an aviator. You can put in a TTP change if you're a surface warfare officer, or if you're a junior submarine sailor. You can make these suggestions. You can use your chain of command. You can write a white paper and send it up. These are all ways that should work. The reality is, as we saw from Sims, they don't always work. So we also have to know that there are ways that are a little bit outside the system that we can work with. And that's where the articles that these gunnery officers wrote for the United States Naval Institute's proceedings come in. We have that same opportunity today. The Naval Institute's still here, still strong. Proceedings is still published. But we've also got other resources. Now we've got online places that we can go with our ideas. Whether it's the Institute's blog or their new news and analysis site, or whether it's a place like Small Wars Journal, or the new Next War blog at the Center for International Maritime Security. There's all these places we can get our ideas out there. There's also the community professional organizations, Surface Navy Association, Tailhook, Naval Helicopter Association. They all have journals, they all have magazines. can write for them as well. The third thing we need to remember is that you have to find something you believe in. All right, this is not about a good fit rep bullet or a good eval bullet. This is not about another piece of chest candy for you to wear on your uniform. This is about combat effectiveness. This is about making your service better and your country safer. You have to have that grit. You have to believe in that. You have to do the hard work. You have to be willing to spend 2 years writing 13 reports that you think nobody is reading, and never give up. Christopher Hitchens wrote a book a couple years ago called Letters to a Young Contrarian. And in it he wrote, don't expect to be thanked, by the way. The life of an opposition is supposed to be difficult. And you have to embrace that and show grit if you really want to see an innovation through to the end. And then the final point that we have here is that you need to listen. The more senior you become, the more innovation is about listening. It's not about you and your idea. It's about the idea that someone else might bring to you. So yes, today we're all junior leaders and we're all here, but tomorrow we're all mid-grade leaders, and then we're senior leaders. And it's not about us, it's about the idea. So be open to the new idea. Be open to listening and bringing up the idea of someone who works for you and championing it inside the system. So those are the 4 lessons that I've observed from this story from a century ago. Now, you'll notice that the title of this slide is Lessons Observed and not Lessons Learned. Whether or not these are lessons learned is up to you guys. Do something with it or not, it's up to you. Thank you.